My name is Judith Kaplan Eisenstein. I am introducing myself because you want to know why I'm here and why I'm talking to you. I've been asked so many times over the years about the big event of my childhood, which was in 1922. Now that's a long time ago, when I became bat mitzvah, the equivalent for a girl of the bar mitzvah, which was at that time the only thing in existence. There was no such thing as a public bat mitzvah. In Jewish law, you became a bat mitzvah, but that only meant that you were responsible for, I don't know, for lighting candles or something on Shabbat. It didn't give you any privileges, and it didn't make any great demands on you. But legally, in Jewish law, you were a woman at the age of 12. 12 was a traditional time for that. I was a little more than 12, because at the time that I was 12, my father was the rabbi in what was essentially an Orthodox congregation where such a thing would not have been permitted at all. He had left the Jewish Center and organized the Society for the Advancement of Judaism. My father's name was Mordecai Kaplan, and he was in the process of thinking out new ways of organizing and living Jewish life, and thinking about Jewish life. And one of the things he was very ardent about was the equality of women. So as soon as he organized the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, and they made a demand on him to have Sabbath services, he said, good, then my daughter will become bat mitzvah. So about 6 weeks after we started conducting services, I became a bat mitzvah. Now, you people may take that for granted these days. There are still an awful lot of people in this country and around the world who are not recognized as bat mitzvah, even though that was such a long time ago. A lot of women I know now are trying to catch up with the time that they lost and taking advantage of the whole sweep of women's lib to become bat mitzvah. They study and they prepare themselves and become probably more conscientious as benot mitzvah, that's the plural, than the kids of 12 or 13. It was quite different when I was a little girl. The idea of standing on the bima, the platform in the synagogue, was unheard of for a woman. The synagogue where we held services was not really meant to be a sanctuary. It was a brownstone house in New York City. If any of you know how a brownstone in New York City is planned, they're all the same. There's a front parlor. You go up a flight of stairs. You come into a long, narrow parlor. Then it narrows down to a little passageway. Then it opens up into what would be the dining room, which was a big room. Now, what we had there was the Ark of the Law, the Aron HaKodesh, where the scrolls were. They were placed at the end of the dining room, the windows facing the backyard. That was a big room. And in those days, the men would come to services on time. They would get there at 9 o'clock or whatever it was in the morning, and they'd go and sit in the front. That's where they were. The women came in late, so they sat behind. They were not being segregated. They just segregated themselves because they didn't hurry. They came in their own good time, and they could sit and, if my father wasn't glaring at them, they could sit and have coffee clutch with each other a little bit. So there I was as a bat mitzvah sitting in the front with all the men, which was a trial to begin with. And getting up on the bima was another trial. But I must say I did not stand before the open scroll of the Torah. I did not read from the Torah. I read from a printed Bible, Chumash, and I read a passage from the Torah, and I read a passage from the Haftarah in Hebrew and in English, and said the blessings, the traditional blessings that any bar mitzvah would have said at that point. That was the whole thing, but that was considered the last word in heresy at that time. I must tell you the reason that I did not chant. That, first of all, I didn't know what I was going to do until the night before. Father hadn't made up his mind. They announced that there'd be a bat mitzvah, but he was thinking about what we should do. So the night before, he called me into his study. He said, "Look, this is what you'll do. Say the brachot." I more or less knew them from just hearing them, but say them, read them properly. And he corrected my Hebrew very strictly. My diction wasn't very good, but he corrected that. Then he said, "Now read this." That was no problem. I could read Hebrew, and then he read the English. He corrected my diction on all of it, and that was it. But that was the only preparation I had, so that I certainly couldn't have learned the chant even if it had been thought of. And it passed. There was the place was jam-packed because people had heard about it, and of course the Yiddish press and some of the Anglo-Jewish press had been quite violent in preparation for this, saying that this was an outrage and a terrible thing to do. They were a little bit behind the times. This was, you have to remember, just 2 years after the women's suffrage amendment. That was 1920, I believe, and this was 1922. So the women's suffrage was still a young thing in those days, and it was the thing that that forward-looking people were concerned about. I think that had a great deal to do with the fact that I had my bat mitzvah when I did. But, the outrage died down pretty fast, and everybody accepted it. And now I think it's subject to all the same abuses that the bar mitzvahs are subject to. Big parties, overdressed and eaten, and all the stuff. Mine was a very simple party. We had a little kiddush after the service, which just meant kichel. You know what kichel are? They're nice kind of plain, rather plain cake. I don't know how to describe it, but it was that was the goodie in my family. Very plain, and some wine. That was the kiddush. And in the evening, we had a party at home. Where the great treat there, that was a real party for the grown-ups as well as the kids. But the kids got the greatest treat we could ever have. That was hot dogs, which we thought was absolutely the last word in luxury. And that was it.